Hello, I'm Nancy Hoyer-Evans, Curriculum Coordinator at iPathways, and today I'd like to talk to you about accessibility as defined by the quality of being easy to obtain or use, understood or appreciated. It's only right, as July 27th, Monday, was the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. For 30 years, the law has been the low bar our society set for those citizens who live with disabilities. So ramps, automatic doors, wider doorways, special bathroom stalls became the way going forward. But we can do better, much better. We can improve our inclusive practices. While I was gathering materials for this video, I searched the GED website looking for their statement on accessibility. Here it is. Accessibility, in the sense considered here, refers to the design of products, devices, services, or environments so as to be usable by people with disabilities. Accessibility can be viewed as the ability to access and benefit from some system or entity. Now, this sounds great, but I'm flashing on my 15 years as an English teacher in a community college setting. Each semester, on the first day of class, there would be 1, 2, maybe 3 students in each class who would come up to me after my lecture and my opening day introduction and syllabus review and hand me a blue sheet of paper from Access Services, indicating that they had a need for some sort of accommodation. And some were easy. Extra time on tests, copies of my lecture notes, a seat in the front row. Some were less so. The student was visually impaired or fully blind. The student had a hearing impairment and would have a signer in the class with us. Some had learning disabilities that made it difficult for them to recognize linguistic syntax. And by the next time I saw those students, which would be 2 days from now, I should have a plan in place to make my course content accessible. I remember feeling overwhelmed, underprepared, and like I needed a PhD in special education, and also to quickly master the science of cloning before I was ready to tackle the challenge. That not being a legitimate option, I set about reacting to the situation rather than being proactive. And I don't recommend that as a strategy to reducing stress. My blundering about, though, did bring some workable solutions, and it prompted me to reimagine what my classroom would be and what my actual role would be. My experience, chastened advice, would be that you do this before the first day. These are the most frequent disabilities we will encounter in our teaching. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, learning disabilities, mobility disabilities, medical disabilities, psychiatric disabilities, traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder, visual impairments, deaf and hard of hearing, concussion, and autism spectrum disorders. I have had students from every category on this list. You may have too. The Centers for Disease Control report on their website that 1 in 5 adults reports having some kind of mobility issue. 1 in 5. That means you either know someone or are someone who is affected. Cognitive disabilities are slightly more difficult to track since not everyone who has one reports it. I know I had several students who had clear learning disabilities, but no history with Access Services, no IEP when they were young. Their parents hadn't wanted them to be stigmatized with labels, and so they arrived in my class without the necessary infrastructure for navigating the system successfully. Those who are in the lower income brackets are more likely to report disabilities, but this doesn't necessarily mean they are more prevalent in this group. They're just more likely to ask for help. What does all this mean to you? It means it's time to talk about universal design. Universal design in education actually springs out of the idea of universal design in architecture, which originated with Ronald Mace, an architect who coined the phrase in his work on designing spaces for people with disabilities in the 1990s. Educators cannibalized the idea, as they are wont to do, and appropriated it with the following definition. Universal design calls for the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible, without the need for adaptation or specialized design. The idea behind universal design is not compromise. It is that in designing a space to be inclusive of all abilities, we actually create an environment that's better for everyone. In my experience, this is true. I found that by taking simple steps, I actually improved outcomes for all of my students, not just those with diagnosed disabilities. For instance, I recorded short stories, assignment descriptions, and video lectures for those students with visual impairment. This made it possible for those with crazy schedules or attention deficit disorder to listen over and over as many times as necessary. I worked with our Faculty Resource Center to caption my videos for those with hearing impairment, but this also helped those whose first language was not English. I worked on adding graphics that improved understanding for those who are really strictly visual learners, and employed peer groups for writing assignments, so students had more than just the teacher to look at their work before it came in to be graded. I reevaluated the readings, looking for stories and examples of writing assignments that made sense given my current population. I investigated dictation software candidates for those who had problems with typing because of injuries or digital or visual impairment. Their favorite was Dragon, by the way. The adaptations made such a difference in student engagement that I kept them in my courses long after the students had moved on to other classes. These are the 7 principles of universal design. Use this lens to look at your classes. Principle 1, equitable use. Everyone needs equal access to the content. Principle 2, flexibility in use. And this could mean anything from when they look at it to how often. Principle 3, simple and intuitive use. They shouldn't have to follow a whole screen full of directions to be able to access it. They'll get discouraged, and they won't. Principle 4, perceptible information. Make sure your content is targeted towards the students that you have in the seats. Principle 5, tolerance for error. This one's so important. Mistakes are how we learn. We really do. We have to feel free to take risk when we're taking on new information. If we don't, we won't. Principle 6, low physical effort. It should be click, click. It should be easy. Principle 7, size and space for approach and use. And this one is particularly important if you're dealing with people in a small classroom and maybe you don't have enough computers for people, or they don't have access to the materials and you have to go somewhere else. Think about all of these things as you're designing your coursework. These principles are general, so you can adapt them to your own needs, which is kind of the point. You do that so that they can. I would even engage the students in this process. Create a questionnaire of sorts that teases out what they feel would help them the most. No need to guess here. Find out from your administrators what is possible once you have your list from your students. Technology is really big in universal design, but it's not everything. The will to make substantive changes comes from you, because equally substantive changes will occur in student outcomes. Vow to do what's possible, not just what's required. Use your new eyes to look at your classroom as a portal to learning that it should be for all who enter there. What untapped potential can be unlocked when we stop limiting our learners based on diagnoses or deficits, or worse yet, our own inability to adapt? I look forward to continuing this conversation with you in my Mentor Mondays, which I will hold every other Monday. Check our iPathways Learning Lab website for registration information. At the end of this broadcast, you'll see a list of sources you can consult so you can expand your knowledge of how to make your classroom accessible. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.